Fiddle for diddle, you'll just have to wait.
So anyway, after the sound of the previous chapters, like I say, chapters 4, 5, and 6, in this vision that John has, there's been all sorts of noise, the praise and worship of the angels, of the elders, the call of the angels, the cry of the saints, and suddenly there's just silence. And we're told it's for half an hour. But why just half an hour? Seems interesting or odd that John should put this in. Well, half an hour, it's not just a finite time that we can sort of associate with and understand. It's also, as we'll see as we go through Revelation, what the commentators often call a split time. As we get to chapter 12, for example, we'll see the phrase a time, times, and half a time. And we get these odd sort of references to time. And John appears to use these split times to indicate a period of transition or change, or even what most commentators see here, a dramatic pause. And here, as we see this silence as a pause, it leads to a sense of anticipation and expectation. The breaking of the seals has brought forth images of judgment. And now, as the final seal is broken and the contents of the scroll are to be revealed, there is a pause. We won't come back to the scroll again. And as we move away from the scroll and we come to the seventh seal, we move forward into that second series of 7. So we've had the 7 seals, we've now got the 7 trumpets, and then later on we'll have the 7 bowls, all developing the same theme, God's judgment upon the earth. And the 7 angels are each given a trumpet, and each trumpet blast ushers in images of judgment. But before we get to that, we have this image of smoke from incense rising up with the prayers of the saints. And we see here a similar picture to what we saw in chapter 6, where the call of the saints was for justice. And they said, how long? And for us today, and for John's readers then, it's that reminder that God hears and answers our prayers as they pray, both for the coming of God's kingdom, as we do still today when we say the Lord's Prayer, but also, as we've seen, as they cry out for God's justice. And then the trumpets sound, and the judgments that were being held back. If you remember in chapter 7, verses 2 and 3, the angel was sort of holding back these judgments. They're now to be released. And as we look at the pattern, what we see is something that's similar to those sort of 10 plagues that were inflicted upon Egypt as judgment upon Egypt, as God prepares to lead his people out of Egypt and into the promised land. There's hail, there's fire, there's blood, the sun is darkened, and so on. And we have to ask ourselves the question, what would this say to John's readers as they make that connection to the judgments and the plagues, not only that they might have experienced within their day-to-day life, but back to God's bringing out of his people from Egypt. It would remind them, and I guess it's a reminder to us too, God has heard our groaning. God has seen the rejection of Pharaoh, the refusal of Pharaoh to acknowledge God, or in this case, to these churches in Asia, the empire of Rome to acknowledge God. It would remind them that God has a plan for his people. It would remind them that although they are caught up in some of this struggle, that actually they won't be caught up in all of it. If we remember back to the Exodus, the Israelites suffer or are included within the first 3 plagues. But then after that, from the 4th plague onwards, God treats the Israelites differently and they escape those plagues. And so they would also, alongside this, they would then anticipate God's bringing them into the promised land. The Israelites coming out of Egypt looked forward to God's promise being fulfilled, land for themselves. And John's vision as we go through Revelation does exactly the same. It promises to these churches in Asia a new land, as it were. And in John's vision, that's presented as the New Jerusalem. And we'll see that as we go through. But I'll stop there, guessing that'll raise a little bit of discussion. Thankful that BT haven't cut us off yet. And we'll see what we come up with.